All right, let's just jump right into this explainer and tackle something literally every single one of us has struggled with at some point. I'm talking about taking densely packed, deeply frustrating information and transforming it into crystal clear sentences. Look, we all rely incredibly heavily on the written word every day, right? Yet so much of what we read is just painfully difficult to get through. So today, we're going to break down exactly why that happens and, more importantly, how we can actually fix it.
Honestly, it's like a shared trauma. Reading bad writing isn't just boring, it can be deeply infuriating. Sometimes it feels like an actual, literal punishment. I mean, we've all been there. You're sitting there with a report or an article, and you find yourself rereading the exact same paragraph 5 times, genuinely wondering if your reading comprehension has just suddenly vanished into thin air. But rest assured, it's usually not you. The truth is, a massive amount of the professional literature being produced today is just completely arcane. It's sloppy, it's poorly constructed, and it's just incredibly frustrating to engage with.
To really prove the point here, just listen to this absolute epic fail of a sentence. This is pulled from a real psychology study on mental disorders. Just try to hang on while I read this. Such multivariate strategies may be of more use in understanding the genetic factors which contribute to vulnerability to psychiatric disorders, and strategies based on the assumption that the presence or absence of psychopathology is dependent on a major gene, or then strategies in which a single biological variable is studied. Wow, I mean, that is almost impossible to understand even if you are a highly trained psychologist. And the problem isn't that I just pulled this quote out of context. The writing itself is just fundamentally broken.
So that begs the question, why exactly does a sentence like that make our brains feel like they're short-circuiting? Because if we want to avoid making these exact same mistakes in our own work, we have to figure out what is mechanically wrong with the text we just looked at.
Well, it really starts with our own cognitive limits. You see, humans can typically only process chunks of text that are about 12 words long at a time. That's our sweet spot. But that terrible sentence we just looked at, that thing is a whopping 50 words long, and many of those words have 4 or 5 syllables. So by the time you finally reach the end of a sentence like that, you've completely forgotten what the beginning was even about. It just entirely overloads our mental RAM.
Let's actually do a quick autopsy on this bad writing, because the structural failures are pretty glaring once you know what to look for. Beyond just being 50 words long, look at the actual structure. The authors are trying to say that some strategies are more useful than others, but then they insert this massive clause right in the middle, effectively tearing apart sections of the sentence that belong right next to each other. On top of that, it's totally unclear who the actor is. The implied subject changes multiple times, burying the real actors under these vague, passive phrases. And finally, the whole thing is just absolutely drowning in jargon. Words like multivariate strategies and psychopathology, they just aren't intuitively understandable. You would have to be deeply socialized into the specific lingo of that academic field to even stand a chance.
Now, you might be thinking that academics and professionals write obscurely on purpose just to sound smart or profound. And sure, maybe a tiny handful do it to immunize themselves against criticism, making sure only a tiny group of insiders can actually decode what they're saying. But honestly, the real truth is a lot more practical and, honestly, a lot more systematic than that.
Most authors slide into these terrible patterns for 5 distinct reasons. First off, higher education largely ignores communication skills. There is shockingly little training on how to actually write for an audience. Second, there's this immense peer pressure to sound objective. A lot of disciplines literally forbid authors from using personal pronouns like I or we, which forces them into this weird, impersonal, passive style so they don't have to take direct responsibility for their choices. Third, it's just habit and laziness. Identifying who is doing what in an argument takes real work, and simply slapping down vague, passive clauses is way easier once you're used to it. Fourth, you have non-native language barriers. Many scholars today are forced to write in English for international journals, even though it's not their native language, putting them at a massive disadvantage. And finally, perhaps the most relatable one for all of us, nobody has the time. Instructors, reviewers, and authors are all incredibly pressed for time, which leads to rushed, unedited drafts that are just kind of phoned in.
Okay, enough about the problem. How do we actually fix it? Let's look at an actionable toolkit you can use to rescue any terrible sentence. Because the good news is, you absolutely do not have to succumb to these bad habits. You can write about incredibly complex topics while remaining entirely clear and accessible. It all comes down to 4 golden rules at the level of language that we just need to master.
If you want your writing to actually be accessible, you've got to follow these steps. Rule number 1. Keep things brief. Don't hedge your bets, and don't pile on subordinate clauses until you hit 50 or 70 words. Keep it tight. Rule 2. Make it blatantly obvious who the agent in the sentence is, who is doing the thing. Rule 3. Use active clauses instead of passive ones. And Rule 4. Rely on action-driven verbs rather than lazy chains of nouns. Let's actually look at exactly what these look like in practice. take a look at this. Instead of using a clunky, academic, passive phrase like, the analysis was conducted by researchers, you can just simplify it. Researchers analyzed. See? It is so much faster, it's infinitely cleaner, and it immediately tells your brain who is doing what.
Okay, this next one is a big one. Choosing verbs over nouns. Having an endless series of nouns chained together by prepositions, like legitimacy of the governance of the Communist Party of China, is just exhausting to read. It's a real slog. But by scrapping that lazy chain and swapping in active verbs, we get this. The Chinese Communist Party uses propaganda to legitimate how it governs. Boom. It's immediately punchy, the subject is perfectly clear, and they're actively doing something.
And then, of course, we have to talk about jargon. Look, I get it. Sometimes you truly need to use specialist terms to be precise. Or maybe you just need to signal to your peers that you know the lingo of your field. That happens. But if you absolutely must use specialized words like hegemony or dispositive, you have to define them clearly for the reader right away. Explain what they mean and what they achieve, and then immediately pivot back to plain English so your audience doesn't get left behind. Trust me, your readers will thank you for it.
All right, moment of truth. Let's take everything we've just learned in this toolkit, short chunks, clear actors, active verbs, and stripped-back jargon, and apply it to that 50-word psychology monstrosity we saw at the very beginning of this explainer. Can a concept that dense actually be made readable?
Well, here is scholar Michael Billig's rewritten version of that exact same text, and it proves without a doubt that complex subject matter absolutely does not require complicated, confusing language. Just listen to how much smoother this flows. If researchers are to understand the genetic factors that make some patients vulnerable to psychiatric disorders, they should use multivariate strategies rather than strategies in which the researchers study only a single biological variable. I mean, it's night and day, right?
So why exactly is that literally a breath of fresh air? It works because it finally obeys the rules of human cognition. The sentence introduces a clear subject right out of the gate: researchers. Those researchers, or they, are now doing things in a logical sequence that our brains can actually process. The dreaded passive voice is completely gone, replaced by strong active verbs. And sure, there's still a tiny bit of jargon in there, but it's broken up into much shorter, highly digestible cognitive chunks that beautifully respect our 12-word processing limit.
Ultimately, what you should take away from this is that writing clearly isn't just about rigidly adhering to strict grammar rules. It's really about respecting your reader's time and ensuring your brilliant ideas actually get understood. Whether you're drafting a thesis, a professional report, or just an analytical essay, hiding behind a giant wall of dense passive text doesn't make you look smarter. It honestly just makes your audience tune out.